to filter in. Okay, so I'll share my screen here just so we can stay on track, on schedule here. And are you able to see the agenda on my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I have lost you all though, so bear with me. You're going to be here somewhere. We still have some committee members filter in, so we'll give it a few minutes anyway while I try to find you. This is not good. I'm not having any luck with this.
Are you in full screen mode?
No. Okay, even though I can't see you all, I'll work on that. I don't want to hold up the code hearing too much. Looks like we have about 25 people on the committee that have signed in. That's a good portion of people. However, that's not everybody. So we'll go through some housekeeping items in the meantime while those people filter in, and while I'll try to see if I can see everybody's face on my screen for some reason. So welcome. Thank you all for joining and being a part of the code hearings. This is for the IECC portion of the code hearings. If you aren't here for that, check the calendar and see what meeting you're supposed to be on, but this is for the IECC hearing, so hopefully you're in the right spot. The meeting is being recorded, as you all got a notification there. Just a heads up on that so that we can go back and listen to things if we need to, or if the general public wants to see, that'll be available. We have disabled the chat function for most people. So we ask that any attendees that have questions or want to speak, that you raise your hand, use the raising your hand function. Same thing with the committee members. We ask that you do not use the chat function amongst each other. I don't know if we were successful in enabling you all to do that completely. I think there's still a possibility for you to chat with the entire group, but not necessarily individuals. So, but we ask that you please don't use the chat function. We want to make this as similar to an in-person meeting as possible. And that being said, you're not going to be, talking to someone across the room in the middle of the meeting. So we ask that you don't do that during this. We also ask that everybody turns on their camera. Again, we want to simulate everybody being present and seeing each other's faces as if we were in a real meeting together. I think it helps with the conversation. So go ahead and keep your camera on through the duration of that. And then anybody in the general public, when it comes an opportunity for you all to speak, we ask that you also turn on your camera when you're able to do so and speak on behalf of whatever you're speaking on. I'll also ask that please refrain from using your cell phones on screen, checking emails during this. I know we all are super busy this time of year with everything going on. If you have to step away, whether it's to go to the restroom or whatever, we ask that you please just turn your camera off for the time being. Take your phone call or whatever you need to do, use the restroom. And when you're done with that, turn your camera back on. It just gets super distracting if we see somebody on the screen kind of typing away on their phone, or you could see their fingers moving on the keyboard. So if you have to attend to something, please turn your camera off for the moment being. We also ask that you mute unless you are speaking. It looks like everybody's muted right now, so that's great. Just continue to be on mute unless you're speaking. We do have a couple people on the line that I want to point out. We have Erica. She's going to be helping us with note-taking today. And then we have, I'm trying to see if both people are on here. We have John Arndt, who is going to be our subject matter expert. And don't see the other one yet. If Robbie joins, he will also be a subject matter expert for the IECC as well. So just so you know that kind of familiarity with everybody introductions. We had an orientation a couple weeks ago. Everybody should be familiar with each other somewhat and their roles, but those three people I mentioned were not necessarily on that call. So I wanted to make sure that you all knew who they were going into the meeting. So I will go through a few more housekeeping rules and items here real quick. We have a timer that will be up on the screen right now. You probably can see the agenda. Go ahead. We'll try something out. We'll be doing this quite a bit throughout the presentation, or sorry, not presentation, the hearing. Go ahead and raise your hand if you can see the agenda on your screen. Let's go ahead and use that function. I want to make sure everybody knows how to do that and everybody can do that. Good, it looks like they're coming through. Looks like almost everybody has been able to do that. Keep them up. We got a couple people, and I can't see this people's screen right now, but Antonio, are you able to raise your hand? And what about Shanti? Can you raise your hand? Nathan, can you raise your hand? Okay, Nathan, I got you. Everybody keep your hands up there. We still got two more people working on it. Antonio or Shanti, if you cannot raise your hand, go ahead and unmute and let us know. Okay, Antonio, good.
I hit the raise hand button and it says my hand's raised on my side.
I don't see it. There it goes. All right, perfect. Okay, thank you, everybody. You can go ahead and lower your hand. I wanted to make sure that, one, you see the correct screen, two, you know how to use that function, because that's how we're going to be voting as a committee. So we will have a timer on the screen when it comes time to time-sensitive items. It'll be a countdown timer, so everybody will be able to see that. And really how things work, I'll explain to you the Robert's Rules of Order for the general public who maybe aren't quite familiar with that. So we're going to start with a proposal. It'll be introduced by myself, and then we're going to have the proponent, if they're in attendance, speak on that. They're going to include where they're from, and then also give us just an overview of their proposal. Again, it's just an overview. They're not reading it word for word. You all have the opportunity to read all these proposals ahead of time. So to save time, we're only going to ask that the proponent gives us a overview of their proposal. From there, we'll ask that anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of that proposal to raise their hand. From there, I will then allow them to come into the panel and turn on their video and speak. They will have 2 minutes to speak. After that, their video will be turned off and they will go back to the public side of things. Once everybody's speaking in support for the proposal on the public side, we'll then ask for the public, anybody in opposition to speak, to raise their hand for that proposal. They will also have 2 minutes to speak in anything in opposition for that specific proposal. After that, we will then come back to the committee. The committee, you will have time, unlimited time, hopefully not unlimited because we have a lot of proposals to get to, but there's no time limit in terms of you speaking your mind, asking questions, having conversations, talking about the proposal amongst yourselves as a committee. From there, once all those have been done, we will go back to the public for any rebuttals. And they will have 1 minute to speak in support, and then 1 minute for anybody that wants to speak in opposition of that proposal. From there, we go back to the committee for a motion to move to pass, to modify, to vote, you call it, but we would need something from the committee to move forward on that. From there, we will do a vote, just like we did with raising our hands earlier. We'll have a count and see if we have quorum, things like that, and then we'll move on to the next one. So really quick overview of Robert's Rules of Order. I wanted to make sure everybody's okay and comfortable with that. Anybody on the panel that has any questions, feel free to raise your hand. I can ask, or I can answer those here, but I'll give you some time to keep your hand up if you have a question. I'll continue on. The last thing I want to share, let's see, I'm looking at my notes here. Oh, a break. We're going to be here for 3 hours. That's a long time to be in one spot. So about halfway through, we'll take a 5 or 10 minute break so you can go to the restroom, answer some of those emails and phone calls that you've been getting and texts and things like that. So just know that about halfway through, it's not going to be perfectly halfway through. Whenever there's a good stopping point, we'll take a 5-10 minute break so you all can attend to those things. So with that being said, thank you all for being here. I know it's a lot of time commitment for you all. You all are very passionate about this. That's why you volunteered your time on this. So thank you for being part of this. And this really makes a difference in the community to have all your input from the panelists to the general public, because this is what we do here in Denver. We provide opportunities for everybody to speak their mind and be a part of things. So thank you all for that. And I believe that's all I had for housekeeping. I don't see anybody that's raised their hand with questions. So with that being said, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, see if I can't figure out if I can see your faces or not. And in that meantime, I'm going to turn it over to the city. They wanted to give a quick conversation on some items.
Yeah, so we had a few questions that got sent our way, and it made it clear to us that maybe some of the things that we were trying to convey during the orientation didn't all land. And so we wanted to make sure that we went through those things so that we're all starting with the same understanding going into the hearings and how this work has progressed to this point and what we're trying to accomplish. So I'm just going to speed through a bunch of things, but if I gloss over anything that anybody wants to talk about more, stop me, interrupt me, whatever. I just want to make sure that we have clarity on a bunch of stuff. So I think the first thing is to say that what we're doing with the IECC and the Denver Green Code updates is complementary to other codes and ordinances as well. They all contribute towards achievement of the whole city goals, and they've been looked at together. But our focus here is on operational energy use with our new building projects and our major renovations, and how that fits in with the bigger goals that the CASTR team has identified for our full building stock to get Denver to where we need to be. So 4 key regulations worth mentioning, because they have been looked at collectively together to make sure that nothing's in conflict. First one, Green Buildings Ordinance, and just talking in brief synopsis on these things, applies to new and existing building projects, both 25,000 gross square feet and larger. That was community initiated. It layers on top of all of our base and mandatory codes. So as the IECC advances, the GBO always layers on top. If there's any reason why it's not layering on top in a cohesive way, it will be adjusted and brought up to date so that it does continue to maintain that role of layering on top. It just adds a little extra higher performance onto each project, either in the energy forum or with creation of green space or holistic total sustainability. So just reflecting what the community asked to have be brought into our building projects a little bit more. Second one to mention, IECC Denver Building Code amendments, focusing on new building projects and major renovations, mandatory base code, so all projects, commercial and residential, targeting ultimately getting us to the 2030 goals outlined in the net zero energy new building and homes implementation plan that the CASR team put together, and trying to track with that trajectory, which ultimately lands us at zero net energy building project outcomes in 2030, not just designs, but outcomes. That's the big goal. That's what the broader community wants us to be targeting. It's not a property by property, you generate what you use. It's a collective goal for all new building projects acting together across Denver. And so we'll address that through the 4 pillars that we've mentioned before: energy efficiency, electrification, renewable energy generation, and grid stability. So that's the focus of the amendments that we'll be talking about. It's advancing the 4 pillars to get us, to keep us on the trajectory to getting to that 2030 goal. Third one, Denver Green Code, also applies to new commercial and residential building projects. Limited use is expected to become mandatory in 2022 for all commercial building projects. Residential will follow, hopefully not too far after, but not immediately in 2022. The goal of the Denver Green Code is not to raise individual project performance extraordinarily high through the limited mandatory compliance. The goal of that limited mandatory compliance is actually to get everybody actually engaging and using it and reading it and understanding what is likely to be made mandatory in the future, because the things in the Denver Green Code may be less familiar to the development community, and it gives everybody a little bit of time to get familiar, understand these things, think about how to succeed before they're mandatory and everybody has to succeed. So that will support the advancement of the IECC mandatory regulations and the other regulations as well towards the zero net energy new building implementation plan goals that are outlined for 2030 outcomes. So it has a much broader scope than the IECC. The Denver Green Code aims for advancements well beyond energy use into other categories associated with sustainability, but energy's in there too. And this committee will look at those energy provisions. The fourth one pertains to existing buildings only. That's the Energized Denver Task Force Existing Buildings Performance Ordinance. And I may not have used the right title there. And Courtney's going to talk a little bit about that one.
Yeah, thanks, Christy. That was really helpful. Let me quickly share my screen and I'll try to go through this. Just helpful for everyone to see. Can you see this all right? Okay, great. So I think you all saw this slide last week in the orientation. I did just want to touch base on, again, how it interlays with what we're doing in this committee. So this is for the Energized Denver Ordinance. It's for existing commercial and multifamily, so not single family homes. There's 2 sides to it. There's the performance requirements and the heating and cooling requirements. Performance requirements, it's for large buildings over 25,000 square feet. There's a 30% average EUI improvement for 2030. And there's different targets for different building types. Small buildings, 5,000 square feet to 25,000 square feet. There'll be lighting, upgrade, or solar starting in 2025. And then on the renewable heating and cooling side, there's partial electrification for space and water heating systems upon replacement. And that's when that's cost effective. And again, this is for commercial and multifamily buildings only. And then there's easy to electrify systems. Requirements are starting in 2025, and then harder to electrify system requirements are starting in 2027. And then I just briefly want to go over this timeline. This really helps us see how the Energized Denver Ordinance overlaps with what we're currently doing on this meeting together today. So, new buildings, of course, become existing buildings. And so when these existing buildings have to comply with the Energized Denver Ordinance, for the building performance requirements and the renewable heating and cooling requirements in the future. We just want to make sure you understand this overlap and timeline. So this reddish orange color, you can see when the new buildings receiving their certificate of occupancies under our current 2019 Denver Building Code. Those are allowed to be permitted through the end of 2022, but they can still receive certificate of occupancies, up until maybe 2024. The yellow above that is what we're all discussing today. So the 2022 Denver Building Code. Buildings would start to get permits in the beginning of 2023, but they could still receive certificate of occupancies up until years like 2026 or 2027, possibly. So the green arrows above this show how Energized Denver overlaps with the requirements of the code. So in 2024, new buildings with certificate of occupancies for that full calendar year will need to meet EUI targets for that building type under the Energized Denver Ordinance for the existing building performance requirements. And then in 2025, existing buildings that replace water heating or space heating systems will be required to partially electrify some heating and water heating systems when it's cost effective. So existing buildings will be required to start electrifying some systems upon those replacements during the same period of time when new buildings will be built under this 2022 code cycle. So as a committee, it's just important to understand the relationship of these timelines and what systems would be allowed in new buildings, given the requirements that are already passed in the Energized Denver Ordinance. So I thought this was a helpful graphic just to show that overall relationship. Let me stop sharing.
And so just to layer onto that, I just want to underscore that the requirements in the existing building performance ordinance won't be exactly the same as the requirements that we have for new buildings, because different opportunities are more attainable for new buildings as opposed to existing buildings. So they're not moving in parallel with the exact same requirements for the two sets of building stock. All of them collectively will get us to the goals that Denver has set. So then a few other things that came to us as questions. Outcome-based compliance for IECC is the ultimate goal in 2030. This will be a big transition for the development community to get to. And so we're going to need strong development community collaboration in coming years to identify the most viable path to achieving that goal. But those outcomes, again, may be different for new buildings from what are being targeted for the existing buildings because of the differences in what it takes to accomplish things in the two different sets of buildings. GBO is not duplicative. I said this already, it just layers on top. And then the targeting of proposals, this code cycle, and in 2024 and 2027 and 2030, each round of code cycle proposals will aim to keep us on the trajectory to getting to that zero net energy collective city new building goal in 2030. Proposals that are created by the city team target the 4 pillars to move towards the goals. But if the committee believes that it's beneficial to push harder on one pillar in this cycle, then the new building implementation plan suggests we do, so that we can offset not pushing as hard on another pillar. That's why we're here to talk about it. We want to find the best path forward towards getting to that goal, and how we address the 4 pillars has to be balanced with what the capacity is in the industry, in the local building community to move forward. So that's what we're here to figure out. And then prescriptive and performance compliance options are still being addressed in the code. There's some conversation about, what's going to happen if the prescriptive gets too hard and untenable. And that's definitely a topic that's been being discussed at the national level as well. Right now, the goal for us is to advance prescriptive and performance equally in terms of the level of benefit that's achieved through each, and then to calibrate them. And so through this committee process, we're going to have to keep calibrating them. We understand that over time, the prescriptive may become untenable. And that's in other states like California, we're seeing a shift to greater reliance on performance path because of this. So we anticipate that the Denver development community will start to shift more towards performance path in a similar manner, but we don't know. We have to watch and see what happens. And we also think that as we get closer to outcome-based compliance in 2030, the value of predictive energy modeling, not just the energy modeling that right now is comparative for code compliance, but actually predictive energy modeling that predicts the EUI for a building will become more commonplace, because the value in our development market will be viewed as much higher than it is today. And so we anticipate that we're going to see that gain higher importance in the community. So the proposals that are going to be heard by this committee address both prescriptive and performance path requirements. We're not suggesting to get rid of any paths this go around. Then there are our proposals include both city proposals, which have been shaped to target advancement across the 4 pillars to get us towards that 2030 goal, and also public proposals, which reinforce this and have been brought to the city as well during the several month-long period of time when we were openly receiving public proposals. All of the proposals that were brought to us by the public will be heard by the committee. We didn't pre-vet those or decide that we wanted to recommend some for adoption and reject any, because we rely on that collaboration with the public. So all of the public proposals have a P before them, and we will hear all of those along with the city proposals as well. Time allotted for each proposal is probably going to range in an average of 18 to 20 minutes per proposal overall, but some will take more and some will take less. We don't want to cut short the conversations. So in our minds, that's what we were factoring as what we think will be the average, but we definitely expect there to be longer and shorter runs on different proposals to fit them. And so I guess then the last thing is, are there any questions about the framework that we're using, what we're trying to achieve, what we're trying to accomplish, the work that's gone into it, any concerns? We'd like to air all of those first so that we can work effectively together.
Kevin, I see that you have your hand raised. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks so much. I just wondered, with just at the start of this, and particularly given what Christy just said, these all sort of have the same value and importance as it goes forward. And I wonder if there is any relative impact to the benefit of each one. If we spend 30 minutes talking about something that has a very minor impact, but shortchange something that has a major impact, is there some metric by which we're evaluating how much impact these have?
And we will be sharing that in coming hearings. We were not yet to a level that we were able to share it in this hearing, but we are actually, NORESCO and NBI and the city team are working together to try to understand the approximate impacts that each proposal might have, understanding that it's an approximation and that some are complementary to each other. So if one does or does not get forwarded, it may affect the effectiveness of another kind of thing. But we are working to put ranges of impact on each one so that then we can understand the range of impact, and so that we can use that as a tracking device throughout this process. So we know if we're floating above our goals or sinking beneath our goals, or where we are as we go along, so that we can be thinking about, is that proposal really too hard for us to say yes to, or is it just kind of sort of uncomfortable? And we'll have more. I think Sean from MBI, I believe, is joining us, and he's going to talk a little bit more about that. But that's a really important point that you brought up.
Thanks so much.
No, I don't see any more hands up, Christy. So shall we take it from here?
Yep.
All right. So I will only say this one more time, that we encourage everybody to turn your cameras on to simulate that we're all in a room together. I think there's about 5 or 6 of us that I have yet to see their faces. So please keep your camera on, and I won't hound you again, because I know that there are some times where you have to turn your cameras off, but For the 5 or 6 of you that have yet to turn your camera on, please do so everybody can see your face. All right, with that being said, I'm going to share my screen and get started.
Kevin, I do have some attendees to run through to check if they're in the room as well.
Sure, that would be great. Yeah, we need to make sure we have quorum. So thanks, Erica.
Yeah. Okay, so just a couple people that I don't see firsthand, and I'm going to read your name off. And if you are in the room, please unmute yourself. First is Chris Blake. Okay. Next is Curtis Underwood. All right. John Burns. And Mark Rodriguez.
Here.
Great, thank you, Mark. And then one other thing is that there are a couple people in attendance that are sharing one vote. And so those folks are Paul Cancer, Chris Werner, are sharing one vote, Alex Martin and Kevin Aronius is sharing one vote, and then Stephen Sanderson is a non-voting member. It does look like Robert Pruitt is here in attendance to sub in for Paul Schaefer as well. So with that said, we have (28) members to create a quorum.
Okay, so 28 members means we would need at least 15, 28 voting members would mean that we would need at least 15 to pass any one of these items. So just keep that in mind when we come to vote. All right, first item I will bring up, let me move it over onto my screen. Item number 14, and this, there we go, is from John. John, do you want to go ahead and unmute and give us a rundown of this proposal?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me, Kevin? Okay, great. Just a very quick background. Noresco is working on the City and County of Denver's behalf to identify measure opportunities for efficiency improvements for commercial and somewhat some multifamily buildings. This measure specifies a mandatory minimum insulation requirement. So it's kind of it's a constraint on the opaque envelope efficiency values for walls and roofs. That doesn't actually impact stringency directly, but what it does do, it sets a base minimum or floor that all buildings must achieve. So it limits the amount of trade-offs. And by doing so, the effect that it would have is to avoid situations where you have a building that complies with a performance approach, but a substandard envelope that is very difficult to retrofit in the future. So this is an unusual one because it's deemed as a new construction measure, but it really affects the building performance over the building's life. So what we've done with this is we've established a mandatory minimum or base floor for these insulation values that are based on a historical standard of IECC 2009. So it doesn't impact the prescriptive requirements that are required for buildings, but what it does do, it sets a mandatory minimum requirement. And there are some precedents for this measure. California's Energy Efficiency Code has had it in force since 2013 without significant pushback. Kevin displayed the summary U factor for the walls and roofs there. So I think in particular, the metal framed is one where we're trying to limit situations where they might just, try to get away with using just cavity insulation, for instance, and not having continuous insulation for a steel frame wall and have that building comply. I believe this one's pretty straightforward. I guess I could turn it over to Kevin and see if there's any questions. And Kevin, if you
Sure.
could also please help me calibrate my level of detail I'm providing for the format and time that we have. I know we have a number of measures, but I don't want to gloss over an important detail that that's included on these proposals.
I think that was good, John. We want to keep it 5 minutes or less on these summaries. Some are longer than others, but I think that was fine. So what we'll do
Okay.
now is we will open it up for public comment first. So the committee hold tight. So anybody in the public that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand and we will allow you to do that. And so I did see one hand go up, but it went down. I'll ask again, anybody from the public that wants to speak in support of this proposal, please raise your hand. And a third time, I do see somebody. Taylor, I'm going to move you over to a panelist, so you will be able to turn your camera on and be able to speak. Go ahead, Taylor. You have 2 minutes once you are ready.
Sorry, I just had a quick clarification. It says the table below has only the U factors, but this also says fenestration area. So would this limit all projects, no matter what, to 40% window to wall ratio? And then I guess I was in favor of just the U factors. Boulder does something like this with their code that's very similar, but they don't have that fenestration area addition.
Sure, John, you can answer that if you want right away.
Yeah, thanks, Taylor. That's a good comment, and I should say catch, because this was meant to be opaque envelope. So yeah, so we're not really proposing any mandatory limit on fenestration area. For example, the primary focus of this one is the opaque envelope, so the roofs, walls, and floors, the U factor for those assemblies. So that last sentence, I'm not sure if I guess that should be clarified. It's not incorrect, but we want to maintain the existing requirements for fenestration.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And Taylor, if that's all you had, then I will go ahead and put you back to the community. Okay, one last time, anybody from the community, from the public that wants to speak on this in support, please raise your hand. And all right, seeing none, we'll move to anybody from the community that wants to speak in opposition of this, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition for this, please raise your hand. And one last time, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, I'll turn it back over to the committee here. So committee, it is now up to you to have conversation, whether you want to ask questions to the proponent, to each other, speak in favor or opposition, feel free to raise your hand and I'll call on you and unmute, and you can unmute accordingly. So Elizabeth, your hand was up first, go ahead.
Yeah, hi everybody. It's Elizabeth Gilmore from Energetics. We're an energy consultant. I have a question about how you envision this being applied to adaptive reuse for projects that would have to meet new construction requirements and have existing assemblies in place.
John, you can go ahead and answer those questions if you want.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we would focus this primarily on new construction and additions in other jurisdictions. I think there are probably some cases where you might want to have additional flexibility for reuse. So converting warehouse or other buildings to multifamily, for example. I think that's something we might want to look at closer. I think we could probably tighten up the language to clarify its focus towards new construction as opposed to reuse. I don't know if the city staff or anyone has any comments on that approach.
And
Yeah,
I have a
we
second.
can-
I have a second question.
ahead,
but go ahead.
Yeah.
We
Yeah,
can do
yeah,
one at
go
a
ahead.
time, or I can get in the back of the line.
Well, if it's a follow-up question, just go ahead.
Yeah, sure. It is a follow-up question. I'm curious as to, and I get the point behind the backstops. And I know Boulder has implemented this, but it's not been, as an energy consultant trying to help people implement this, it's just not as easy as it looks on paper. The reason that we have the UA alternative method and the performance method is to give folks flexibility with the baseline U values. And by setting a backstop for every inch of the building, you remove that flexibility. And I think there'll be the unintended consequence of people moving away from the performance method when it can't gain them some flexibility. I support the backstop for major assemblies, but I would be against it for some of the details. And I'm not sure how there's a way to articulate that.
Yeah.
So I will say that just real quick for a point of clarification that there will be an opportunity for us to make modifications if somebody from the committee wants to make a motion for that. So it's not that everybody has to have a response right now. Just know that that this is good conversation no matter what, whether you're directing your question to the proponent or just to the committee to take into consideration.
If there's a way it could be implemented to say a percentage of the envelope, giving folks with some flexibility to, I don't know, 5% of your envelope area would be allowed to be accepted from the backstop, something like that. Anyway,
okay. So that would be your suggestion to the committee. Okay.
Yeah, that as well as building in some flexibility for our adaptive reuse projects, because existing buildings won't be able to do this.
Understood. All right. Next, we'll move on to Eric. Your hand was up next.
Right. Thank you, Kevin. With respect to the exception of C407.4.1, I'm curious if there would be consideration, John, perhaps to amending that so that we are not accepting entire buildings that may have data centers or computer rooms, and that we are instead maybe accepting the space itself or that portion of the building or the room that contains the data center. As an example, I'd hate to have a 50,000 square foot building with a 400 square foot computer room and then accept the whole building from these requirements. So I'll likely propose a floor modification to that if the committee is amenable to that. But curious if that's something that the question is, would you be open to that as well, John?
Yeah, I would. I want to go back to the earlier comment made on the building details and reuse. I think there could be some ways to structure and modify this to keep the intent without eliminating all flexibility from those types of cases, whether it's installation details at headers or intersections or whatnot. I think the intent is to have an overall envelope performance. With regards to data centers, this is what we had put in California. Yeah, I think that would be a reasonable accommodation, Eric. It's meant to not overly penalize larger buildings that are primarily data centers whose loads are so large that the building envelope becomes a little bit inconsequential, and you really want to just expel the internal heat from the building at most of the year. I think we could certainly accommodate that. So we're really looking at, not necessarily the small server room in an office building, but the larger data centers that are 20 to 100 to 200 watts per square foot of internal load.
Yeah. Appreciate that. And I do have one other question just regarding to, in regard to the 750 kilowatts value that's being used in that particular exception. Do we feel like there's maybe a different, I don't want to say criteria, but maybe measure other than kilowatts, or whether we want to do a BTU conversion on this? If I understand correctly, we're talking about the heat and heat dissipation here, or maybe overall. So I'm curious if the 750 kilowatts is the best way to communicate that.
Yeah, so I think the reason why it was done via a load as opposed to other metrics is that data centers and computer rooms can have different loads, and that's the load kind of drives the the balance point of the space, as well as the heating, cooling requirements, or heating if there are any. I think I'm trying to do the math in my head, but I think 750 kilowatt for the minimum load that is needed to be classified as a data center, I think per ASHRAE as well as other jurisdictions, is 20 watts per square foot. So you're not looking at a very large building to meet that, when considered that a lot of data centers will have 100 watts per square foot or greater. But I'm open to, I'm not too particular about how that, what metrics used to classify that exception.
Right. Thank you. That's all for me.
Okay. Thanks. Linda, your hand was up next. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. My question, I guess it's twofold, and it's regarding the purpose itself. And so have a question for the committee members on whether we're finding that there's a need for this, whether roofs have an insulation value less than 20, and whether we're finding that walls commonly have an insulation value less than an assembly value of 15. And I say that because the first time that I encountered the minimum requirements in Title 24, a consultant was using them incorrectly to suggest that the minimum requirements were appropriate for a mountain climate zone in California. And they were kind of proposing them as a good place to start for value engineering. So an unintended consequence. So with that, can we have some discussion about whether this is solving a problem?
Sure. Anybody want to speak to that? Go ahead and unmute.
Kevin, just as a point of order, I think the committee discussion would follow this question period and then potential rebuttal, and then we'll have committee discussion. Is that correct?
Sure. Yeah, that's fine. I was doing it a little bit differently because we're virtual. It's a little bit harder to write down questions and follow all that. So I would like, if it's okay with everybody, if there's a question to the committee that someone can answer, go ahead and answer that. But to still have this Q&A or this period of time is just a conversation amongst the committee.
Yeah.
So I don't know if anybody has any commentary for Linda's question to the committee or wants to chime in on that before we move to the next question. Okay, well, unfortunately, Linda, that's something that the committee is going to have to ponder there. So we will move on to the next person that rose their hand. Chuck, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, everybody. I just have two questions. One, it seems that as we move away from natural gas and we electrify buildings, that's going to put a pressure on the need for maybe even more better envelope performance. I mean, we're looking at higher both capital costs and operating costs with even good heat pumps versus natural gas. And also, of course, heat pump performance can decline considerably when we get to very low outdoor air temperatures. So I'm wondering if the insulation values that are being used are older values, or are they reflecting a future where we're electrifying buildings? Because it seems like that would have an impact on what the optimum envelope performance is.
Yes, that is a good question. That's the other aspect of it. We don't really have direct proposals to significantly improve the current insulation requirements as far as a requirement. What we do have are which will be presented later, we have a set of energy credits which are identified, and they're optional, but buildings will have to use some subset of these credits to achieve the required efficiency levels. So that's a carrot versus a stick approach. And the energy credit per envelope is a overall building UA approach. But I agree with you. I think there's place, potentially in the future for advanced fenestration to limit heat loss and comfort issues associated with different heating methods.
Okay, thanks. My second question is, different insulation materials have very, very different values of embodied carbon emissions. Is there somewhere else where that is going to be addressed?
Yeah,
I don't think oh, go ahead, John.
Oh, good. Well, I was just going to say that it's not really the scope of the Denver IECC code, the efficiency code, to address that directly. I think that is a consideration. We do have a separate session on the green code, which would address embodied carbon and operational carbon.
Can I chime in for a second on that? Yeah, John's right. It's not in the IECC. There are public proposals submitted for the IBC material section related to wood, steel, and concrete. And then there's more stringent versions of those in the Denver Green Code, but not for the insulation components.
Yeah, there's a big difference between, for example, cellulose insulation versus blown insulation in terms of the amount of CO2 involved. So at some point that needs to be considered. Maybe this isn't the right place, but I thought I'd at least bring it up.
Thanks, Chuck. So we'll move to the other Chuck. Sorry, I didn't clarify. There's two of you on there who raised your hand first. So Chuck, the other Chuck, go ahead and unmute.
No problem. Thank you, Kevin. My question, just two quick housekeeping things. It looks like the section reference at the bottom of C 402.1.1.5 is the C 402.4.2 should be in the base code. It's C 402.4.3. And so I was just want to make sure that that was just a typo. It wasn't as needed change to the base code.
Yeah, Chuck, I think that's correct. Yeah, it should, if we're referencing the SHEC, it should be 0.3.
Okay.
Next
and
section.
then in the table, there's a footnote A in the table after the U factor. And I didn't see a footnote. Reference.
Sure, we can come back to that. Just not to put John on the spot, but we can let him come back to that. So looks like footnote A, and then also you're asking, just so I know, that are we talking about this highlighted section being 0.3?
Exactly.
Okay, so committee members, when we go to to call for a vote on this, that might be something that we need to modify. Just a heads up, someone will need to make that that clarification there when we call it to vote. So thanks, Chuck. Was that all you had?
That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, great. Next up, looks like Carol, your hand was up next. Go ahead.
Yes, I'd like to go back to the exception. Buildings with data centers or computer rooms that have a design continuous load greater than 750 kW. First of all, should we have should there be a clarification that says whether or not this is an electrical load or whether it's the equivalent MBH, because there won't be 100% of the electrical load rejected as heat. So it's not 1-for-1.
Yeah, I think that's a good clarification. I think the intent here is load, but
Okay, so we could, again, the floor could make a nomination there to modify that. So keep that in mind when it comes time for that. So if Carol, that's all you had, we'll move to the next person. Jamie, you are next. Looks like you're still trying to work on audio there. We'll give you a minute. Technology, I tell you.
I think you might have to
Still
unmute,
not quite.
Jamie.
He might utilize the chat function here. Who knows? That is, I guess, a good time that you could use. Oh, he does not have a mic on this connection. Good time to use the chat. So while we wait for Jamie to type up his question, I'll read it once he asks the question. Jamie, is the question that you typed earlier what you want to ask about the spandrel treated? How is the spandrel treated? Give me a thumbs up if that's what you're asking about. Okay, I don't hear. We'll give him a few more minutes here. All right, so I don't see any more hands up. Jamie, if you do get your audio going, please raise your hand again so we can get that. So I'll ask again from the committee, is there any more conversation that needs to be had or wants to be had at this time? What will happen now is if there's no more conversation to have, we'll open it back up to the general public for any rebuttals on that. So I'll ask one more time to the committee, is there any other conversation or questions that you may want to have? And it looks like we do have one. Sean, go ahead and unmute.
Thank you, Sean Dennison, New Buildings Institute. In regard to the existing buildings issue, that could be addressed just by making these backstops apply to new assemblies as opposed to all assemblies. Thank you.
Sure, thanks. Okay, so Jamie is asking this question, and this is to John. So John, how is spandrel treated? Title 24, 2019, section 120.7.B.6 has a specific accommodation for spandrel with a U value of 0.280. Are you suggesting that spandrel fit into the metal framed wall? Question mark, and a U value of 0.0064 question, which would kill any spandrel / curtain wall. That is Jamie's commentary there, and to John, the proponent.
yeah, I think the scope of this proposal doesn't include the spandrel panels exactly. I think spandrel panels, excuse me, could be considered part of the fenestration area. If it is, if it's not considered part, no, I'm getting a no on that. Yeah, I think I might have to think about how that applies to this particular case. I know we have separate U factors designated for spandrel panels.
Okay, Jamie, are you able to communicate now with your new audio? No, okay. I'll just read his chat. He says that needs to be very, very much clarified. So the rest of the committee, please take that in consideration. We take a vote on this, on any modifications or passing or not passing this. Okay, with that being said,
Evan, I think we're losing your audio. I don't know if it's just me.
oh, there we are. Sorry, I was on mute.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. So I was saying that there are no more committee hands up, so I'll turn it over to the general public. Anybody that wants to speak in rebuttal for support of this, please raise your hand. Again, this is for support rebuttal. Please raise your hand.
No, I haven't done it. I'm just opening it right now.
Looks like Jamie's okay. Kai, I am going to allow you to turn your video on. You had your hand raised. Go ahead. When you can turn on your video, you will have 1 minute to speak in support of this proposal. Kai, can you hear us? Okay, I do not hear you. Try it again, Kai. Give it a minute. It should switch you over. While that is happening, anybody else from the general public that may want to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. And last call, anybody from the general public wants to speak in support of this? All right, Kai, let's try one more time. Can you unmute if you want to speak in support?
Okay, did I get it that time?
All right, that works.
Yay, okay. I do not have a way to turn on video, but basically coming from the building side of things, just wanting to make sure that as we talk through these exceptions, that as they are implemented, if they are implemented, that it's clear. Because we've worked in the past on some things that got so many exceptions going and so many variations that it became unmanageable. And it was hard to know until you got into review for permits, what the actual interpretation was going to be. And to have these new codes be more easily adopted, having it be clear so that there aren't a whole lot of exceptions and we don't have to wait for interpretations, I think is going to be key.
Okay, thank you for that feedback. I will now mute you again. So with that being said, there are no other hands from the community in support that would like to speak. So let's move to anybody in opposition from the community that wants to speak. Please raise your hand. Second call, anybody from the community that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. And third and final call, anybody from the community that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, it is now back up to the committee. So committee, it is now up to you for somebody to make a call for a motion here. And that could be a motion to modify. Remember that there were several things that we wanted to change in the conversation, that one being this section right here. Maybe there was some discussion about the exception, things of that nature. I would encourage you to try to come up with a modification instead of just going ahead and shooting this down, and see if the committee would go for that modification instead. So if there's anybody that would like to have a movement, please raise your hand. I see Eric has his hand up. Go ahead, Eric.
Thank you very much, Kevin. I'd like to propose 3 modifications for consideration. The first being editing the correct reference in C402.1.5, the very last cross-reference, changing that from 0.2 to 0.3 so that it is the correct section reference number. So that would be the first one. The next one will be for the exception under C 407.4.1. I'd like to propose changing the first portion of the exception to buildings or portions thereof with data centers. So adding or portions thereof so that from an enforcement perspective, we're not creating a loophole that could accept entire buildings from some of these requirements. And then the third modification that I'm proposing is simply to delete the reference A to the footnote there in table C 407.4.1.6.
Okay, so I have made those changes on the screen so that everybody is aware of what the motion is. So there is a motion on the table to approve this as now written, not originally written, but as it's written currently on the screen. Is there any other motions? Is there a second, or is there another on that? Carol, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
I'd like to make a motion to also revise the exception to clarify that it's an electrical load, not heating load.
Okay, there's computers going to have the design continuous load. So you want to add electrical load? You want to add the term electrical here?
Yes.
Okay. Eric, is that okay with your motion? Since this is your original motion, we're kind of doing it a little bit out of order, but if you're okay with that, we can continue moving forward.
Yeah, I am, as long as that meets the intent of the proposal, and we're actually not changing the intent or the enforcement of the proposal. That's fine with me.
Okay, great. So the motion is still a single motion to approve this proposal as written on the screen. We would need a second on that. If anybody's willing to second that, please raise your hand. Antonio, go ahead. Antonio, can you verbally say if you second that? I saw your hand go up.
I second the motion.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we now have
Kevin, we lost your audio again.
Thanks. Sorry, this back and forth muting gets me.
And Kevin, I would just like to clarify here. It looks like we have 27 voting members in attendance, not 28. So that would mean 14 votes for a pass.
Okay, great. So we still have quorum. So with that being said, there is a call to vote now because we have a motion and a second. You are voting on this proposal as written on the screen to accept. All those in favor, please raise your hand virtually.
Whoa. I thought we were just approving the amendments, not the full measure. Can you clarify, please?
I'm sorry. Yeah, that is true. You're voting on to approve these changes to the proposal as written on the screen. So all those in favor of those changes, please raise your hand. Thanks for that clarification. So I will begin counting. This will take me a minute. 5, 6, 7. Okay, we have 23 by my count. Go ahead and lower your hands. I'll wait till they're all lowered. Okay, all those opposed, please raise your hand. Seeing none, and then all those who abstain, please raise your hand. So remember, you would have to, as a voting member, you have to do one of the three there. So we will count. I see one. So 24 total.
And Kevin, just as a point of order, I believe we have a couple members that are perhaps listening in, but in transit, and therefore unlikely to be able to vote from their mobile device, hence the difference in total count.
Sure. Thanks for that. That does create a little bit of an issue there. I don't know if they can unmute and give us their vote there. I don't know who those are on my screen without, I did see it come up in the chat, but I don't, there's no indication on my side on whose that is. But we still have quorum with the numbers that we have, and we still have the majority there. So I'm not too concerned on this one. If we have something close, I think we can address it as a committee on how we want to handle that. So, all right, so this is approved as modified in terms of the modifications, sorry, have been approved. So now that the modifications have been approved, now we need a nomination from the floor on what to do next. Do we want to accept this now as written? Do we want to not accept it or what? So we need a nomination from the floor.
I'd like to propose some additional amendments,
okay,
if we may. And I have one other question, and maybe this is semantics, and I'm curious as to why this table ended up in C407 rather than in C402.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Kevin, is it appropriate for me to
go ahead,
address
John.
that?
Sure.
Yes. So as far as the placement, I think it was discussed with staff, and since the prescriptive requirements aren't changing, the idea is to places limitations or restrictions on the performance approach. So that's why it was placed in C407. So it may seem a little unusual how it's placed, but the idea is that especially since the language of the IECC has been changed to kind of get rid of the prescriptive type language and just consider them requirements, it was deemed that this would be the best place for it.
Okay. Thank you. Just wanted to make sure we were putting it the right in place. So there's two amendments I'd like to propose. I like Sean's idea of adding some exception or language to exclude existing assemblies. I think that just solves a lot of problems. I'm not sure where that goes. And while you're thinking about that, the second exception I would propose is to allow a certain percentage of the envelope to be exempt from this. And whatever that percentage is could allow some flexibility with, some of those thermal bridges. It could allow that flexibility with spandrel. Maybe it's, and I'm not sure what the magic number is here. I'd be interested in opinions, but just say 5% could be excluded from this so that people can, I think then the intent of the backstop is implemented. We have to put continuous insulation on our steel framed walls. We can't get away with that anymore, so that we could implement the big picture stuff while still allowing a little flexibility.
Okay, Elizabeth, so your motion is to add 2 new exceptions. Is that what I'm hearing?
Mm-hmm.
And you're saying, I missed the first one.
Yeah, I'd like to, and this I think was, I think it was Sean's suggestion that we exclude existing assemblies from this whole section.
Okay, and the other being excludes or accept 5% of the envelope as well.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
do I have
exactly.
those correct on the screen?
I think so. We might have to get pretty code language in there, but
Sure.
but
I
yeah,
mean,
that's the general
fine, but-
idea.
Sure. Okay, so there's a
And-
motion for those exceptions.
And I might
Anything else, Elizabeth?
encourage some discussion about that 5% number because I just pulled that out of the sky.
Okay. Next up is Mark. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I'm just looking for some clarification on this table 407416. This is a new table, correct? And if so, where do the values come from? And are those values consistent with past code additions? And then I guess the third follow-up question was, if it is different than current requirements, was there a cost evaluation done? Or I guess maybe we're not supposed to talk about cost, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I can answer that, Kevin. So these are should align with a previous version of IECC for Denver's climate zone. It's 2009 as far as the requirements. As far as the cost effectiveness, it's implied that if the current code requirements are cost effective, something less stringent, I guess this wouldn't automatically follow, but that something that's less stringent would follow because the current code meets that requirement. So, this, since it's not a increase in stringency per se, it doesn't require, a demonstration of cost effectiveness. That makes sense.
Thank you.
Okay. Eric, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm going to jump in with some more specific language to work with Elizabeth and Sean in terms of the first additional exception, specifically new roof, wall, and floor assemblies in the proposed design shall meet the applicable minimum U factor requirements of table 407.1.46. And that's in the chat. So if you want to just copy and paste that, it might be easier. And obviously looking to Elizabeth for acceptance of that, since I am proposing to modify her recommendation.
I think that meets the intent, Eric. Thank you.
That's all.
So Eric, that you're talking to delete the existing assemblies and replace it with this sentence. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah, so I think I like Eric's language that makes it not an exception. It just describes how it's applied. If I read that correctly.
Right, and we would move that above the exception that's there that we previously voted on.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. So there is a motion on the table to modify this proposal as written on the screen currently. Chuck, do you have any thing you want to add?
Yeah, so let me add, because I don't know where Sean intended that sentence to go, but I think it could actually almost replace the final sentence of the code section, the underlined portion. The proposal, design, roof, assembly shall meet the applicable U factor requirement to table. If we just replace that entire sentence with that new roof, wall, and assemblies, I believe that's what Sean is intending, but I'm not positive. And I like this change better instead of creating an exception. So
I'm seeing head nods, so I'll go ahead and do that from the person that made the proposal there, or a motion. Okay, anybody else to comment on this? We do need a second to vote on these changes. So anybody wants to second that, please raise your hand to speak. Christy, go ahead.
Go ahead, Chuck.
I was just going to second, but I think Eric wanted to say something first.
I'd like to encourage discussion around the 5% value before we vote. I don't have a feeling
could do that.
5% is appropriate, but I would love for committee members to weigh in. It certainly feels all right to me, with perhaps the exception of very large buildings, when that, even though it's a small percentage, that could be a very large area. However, when we're talking about envelope, it's still all relative. So it feels okay to me, but it's just a
Sure. So Eric, I do like that, and I do want to encourage the conversation on that. But with keeping time in mind, let me suggest something to the committee and see if this would be acceptable. So we can approve this as submitted with intent to modify that one section. And so if everybody can agree that that exception of 5% of the envelope being excluded is okay, knowing that that percentage will change, then we don't have to spend a large amount of time discussing that or trying to figure out what that number is. As a committee right now, we can come back and say that we accepted that this is going to be, a certain percentage is going to be excluded, to be determined by a sidebar conversation of committee members. So let me throw that out there. It's not to say we have to do it that way, but just for the sake of time, it might be something we want to consider. Elizabeth, go ahead.
Yeah, I could go do a little homework and see, what's been the deficient envelope area in the past, and use that to try to get that less. A little homework there. I also have one suggestion for a modification of the bolded part that you just added. I don't know that shall meet is the correct word there. I think we want to say shall not exceed the applicable U factors. We don't actually want them to meet those U factors, right? We'd really like them to do better.
Great clarification, Elizabeth.
So yeah, so I can at our next meeting, I can bring some documentation and see if we can refine that 5% number. But I like your suggestion of deferring that.
Sure. I'll make a clarification that we would not be tabling it unless someone made a motion to table. There is a motion currently to approve as modified right now. So I would say if we want to take the motions down on that, we can. But if everybody wants to agree to that that percentage is going to change, we can vote that this passes with just that modification to be changed at a later time. So we just want to make that clarification, since you're the one that made the modification or the movement. Elizabeth, go ahead and state that what you would like to do, if you want to remove that and remake something there.
So do I say we propose to table it? Is that the right words? What do I say?
Well, I would highly suggest not tabling it. A way around it is to see if the committee is okay with that exception, and trusting that committee members will come back and make that right number okay. So I would say that I would make a motion. I would remove your original motion and make a motion to approve this as submitted with the intent to modify that 5%.
Okay, I'll do that. But do we have any other discussion though? Any other amendments before we get to that point?
I don't see any hands raised. So if we could get a second on that new on that new motion, that would be great. I see Mark, go ahead.
Can we just go back to exceed real quick? Is everybody really comfortable with this as saying exceed? Because then the factors in the table don't make any sense. Because that's what you're supposed to be hitting to meet the code. But now you're saying you have to exceed those numbers. Does that jive with like what's commercially available?
By exceed U factors, we mean don't get worse than this. So yeah, that's commercially available.
Because the table is minimum installation requirements with maximum U factor. Okay, I just want to make sure everyone was concerned, because shall not exceed seems like it's difficult in code language, I guess, when you have a table of published values. But if no one else has that same concern, then I'll put my hand down.
That's a valid point, Mark. We could also, with Elizabeth's new motion, we could make that more codified, if you will, that language, if we want to do that. So if you're fine with that, we can make that more code friendly, that sentence as well.
Would it make sense to
Okay.
rename the table as maximum U factors rather than minimum insulation requirements? And I think they both meet the same intent, but you know, Mark has a good point.
Yeah, there is a bit of confusing language there with the name of the table and then the column label.
Okay, so I would suggest that we, with your motion there, Elizabeth, that 5% with the intent to modify that and to codify this sentence so it matches up. You know, let's not hash out those details now, but that's what I think your motion is for. And if if there's someone that wants to second that, we can then vote on that.
Yeah, just to clarify, I think it probably makes the most sense to match the title of table C402.1.4, which is titled Opaque Thermal Envelope Assembly Maximum Requirements, U factor method, to unite those in some way. And I'll let you work your magic. How about that?
Okay, sure. So we still need a second on Elizabeth's motion.
Yeah, I'll second that.
Okay, thanks, Eric. So with that being said, committee is now called to vote. You are now voting on the proposal as submitted here with the intent to modify this percentage of envelope exclusion and to modify the intent to modify this sentence to make it match up with code language. So with all those in favor of that motion, please raise your hand.
Kevin, a point of order. I don't believe that was the case. I believe we wanted to keep the sentence the same and modify the name of the table. That was my understanding before you provided that summary. Am I misunderstanding the?
Okay, so to modify this table name.
Right.
Correct. And keep the language the same up above.
Understood. Okay, so I'll repeat that just so we're clear. That is to approve this as submitted with the intent to modify the name of this table that's highlighted and this percentage, the intent to modify that percentage at a future date with committee members. So all those in favor of that, please raise your hand. And it'll take me a minute to start counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 21. Okay, go ahead and lower your hands. Okay, all those opposed to those, please raise your hand. Seeing none. Okay, sorry, we've got one. And then all those abstain, please raise your hand. And one. Okay, so thank you. You can lower your hand. So now what happens is that this is now as if this is presented to you as a committee to vote on passing this as or not. So now that we have accepted as a committee these changes with the intent to modify those two things, you are now going to vote on whether this is going to pass or not. So with that being said, or sorry, I need a nomination for a call to vote, a motion to vote on that. Eric, go ahead.
I'd like to make a motion to approve as modified by modifications number 1 and number 2.
Great. Is there a second? Nathan?
I will second.
Okay, great. I will then call a vote. So all those in favor of passing this proposal as written with those 2 modifications at a later date, please raise your hand. Votes are still coming in. I will give it a minute. All right, I'll start counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Okay, please lower your hands. Okay, all hands are lowered. Chuck, do you have a question? Okay, I'm going to lower your hand then. All those opposed, please raise your hand. Votes are coming in. Okay, I will now count. We have 1. Okay, please lower your hands. And then all those abstain, please raise your hand. Okay, I will count right now, and we have 3. Okay, please lower your hands. All right, this proposal has passed by the committee 20 to 3, as submitted with the intent to modify the table name and the percentage of envelope excluded. Congratulations, we made it through our first one. And it's only 3:30. So thanks all for that. We like I said, this is a process, and there are some things that have to get hashed out. So I want to reiterate some things before we continue. First is try to not utilize the chat function. I know there was some extenuating circumstances that happened. So that was good that it was still enabled. However, we please refrain from using chat functions unless you have to. The second is that I would suggest that if we do have multiple modifications moving forward, that that we make those all at once, so we don't have to go through the conversations back and forth. It would just speed time up. We don't have to, but I think it would be good for time saving, because I know we have 80 plus or something of these to get through, and if we spend an hour on each one, we're not going to have enough time, and everybody's going to be upset about that. So just a suggestion to the committee members on that moving forward. Okay, so next item for business on the agenda is P 12.1, and I believe that is Mike. Mike, if you're on, while I pull that up, you can give us a summary of it. So it is loading. And Mike, give me a minute, and you, while I'm pulling it up, you should start to be able to move and turn your camera on and speak. Okay, Mike, you are now in the panelist section, so you are able to turn your camera on and speak.
All right, maybe I can. Can you hear me?
We can hear you and see you.
All right. So Mike Fulton, Western Mechanical Solutions. The new code actually solves one of the pet peeves I have when you go to a restaurant and they have the garage door that opens and they're running the AC on full and just wasting a ton of energy. So the only problem with the new code is that it did not exempt evaporative cooling. And so what we're proposing here is, evaporative cooling needs relief out of the space. So you could have your garage door open in your brew pub or whatever restaurant and use evaporative cooling, which would be more energy efficient anyway than typically than using mechanical refrigeration. But it has to be, interlocked so that, you would be allowed to use evaporative cooling when the garage door is open. So that's basically the short story. Pretty simple. The way the code is currently written, you wouldn't be able to use this exemption for evaporative cooling. So that's the way we read it.
Okay, thank you, Mike, for the summary of that. I will now put you back out of the committee list. If I can find your name, and back to the public.
Kevin, I would keep him as a panelist just in case there's any questions from the committee until we get through that portion.
Okay, that's fine. So while I'm doing that, back to the panelists, this is now the time for the general public to speak. So committee members, please hold your conversations for now. But anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this proposal, please raise your hand. You'll have 2 minutes to do so. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this proposal, please raise your hand. And last call for the general public. Anybody, we do have somebody, Mark. Mark, I'm going to promote you to committee so you can turn on your camera and speak. You will have 2 minutes to speak once you're able to do so.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Hi, my name is Mark Zielinski. I'm a consulting mechanical engineer practicing in Denver, among other places. And one of the interesting things about evaporative cooling is that you can marry it up with direct expansion mechanical cooling. And when they're appropriately controlled, you can make it so that the mechanical cooling is really only coming on for an appropriate trim of the evaporative cooling temperatures. We've applied this many times in lots of buildings, and it really reduces cooling compressor hours on just any standard building. But it's a given that when you're operating that evaporative cooler with mechanical cooling that you need relief. Therefore, allowing that operation for with an open garage door, a large opening. By the way, the base code is triggered at 40 square feet. So it's not just garage doors here. We're talking just a double man door that requires the interlock to the set point of the space. So I'm recommending that we allow for supplemental, perhaps is a word, DX cooling during economizer mode would also allow an exemption to the interlock with doors to the set point. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mark. I will move you back. And last and final call, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing no other hands raised, I'll move to opposition. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition to this proposal, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this, please raise your hand. And last and final call, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, I'll turn it back over to the committee. So committee, if you want to speak on this, ask questions to the proponent on this, have commentary, anything you want to do on this, please raise your hand and we can start calling on you. Okay, I'll ask one more time. Anybody from the committee that has any conversation, questions on this, please raise your hand. Eric, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Kevin. Just a question to the proponent. The exception uses the term systems utilizing evaporative cooling. I'm wondering if we shouldn't be speaking to the system in this exception, but we should be talking about the tenant spaces with systems that use evaporative cooling. And maybe it's just a matter of semantics, but just curious your thoughts on that.
So that I follow, what you're talking about is targeting the occupancy itself or the space itself for this exemption instead of the whole system?
Correct. So
I'm fine with that.
I would suspect that we'd have potentially within a building, there could be many different systems, and so it wouldn't be, you know, the whole building, and it certainly doesn't say the whole building. But I think the idea is to give the exception, you know, to the evaporative cooling spaces. So just an idea, certainly open for discussion.
I'd be fine with whatever you'd suggest on that. I hadn't anticipated that.
Okay, last and final call for committee to talk on this. Raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, since there was a little bit of conversation, we have to open it back up to the general public on any rebuttals for the suggestions on that. So from the general public, anybody wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support, please raise your hand. And last call, anybody in support of this from the general public, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, we also have to ask for anybody in opposition for rebuttals from the general public since there was conversation. Please raise your hand if you want to speak. Anybody in opposition from the general public, please raise your hand if you want to speak. Third and final call, anybody from the general public in opposition wants to speak, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, back to the committee. Committee, now this is your time to make a motion. Again, I want to encourage you, if there are multiple changes to this, let's try and do it all in one swoop so we can vote on it just once. But is there a motion that someone wants to bring to the table? Paul, go ahead.
I just had a quick question about that gentleman's suggestion about augmenting this with DX cooling. Isn't the intent of this right here is to stop mechanical cooling when those doors are open? Period.
That's the intent in the code, that in the 2021 code currently, yes.
Yeah, I just think it gets a little gray if we start going to evaporative cooling and then we start adding back mechanical cooling. I'm not saying there's not something there to be gained or utilized, but I think the whole point is when the door is open to have no mechanical cooling until you're over 90 degrees, right?
Yeah, the set point would have to be raised to 90 to allow mechanical cooling the way it's currently written.
Okay, so I don't know how with this suggestion, if a suggestion gets added as a modification or something. I just wanted clarification that I think the intent of this is to cut off all mechanical cooling if that door is open until it gets over 90 degrees.
I do agree with Mark that the concern that I would have would be someone would add evaporative cooling to get past the requirement and then just abandon it in place and not use it. So that would be my concern, but we're going to break everything.
Okay.
I tell them to do anyway. So.
Right.
Okay, Paul, thanks. If that's all you had, we'll move on.
That's all I had.
Okay, Eric, go ahead.
Thank you. So to that point, Michael, would you be amenable to an amendment to change it to systems using 100% evaporative cooling so that there is not that loophole? That was the language that you included in your reason statement, but not the language that you proposed in the amendment. So I'm curious if that 100% added in would be okay.
I'd be fine with that. Yeah. What our concept was this is for, your small brew pubs, these aren't big systems. So, either they're using evaporative cooling with the doors open or refrigeration with the doors closed.
Okay, so sounds like he's open to that. We'll move on. Chuck, go ahead.
just speaking to that 100%, do we need to add that? I don't know if we need to add that, since the second part of number 4 clarifies that other forms of mechanical cooling are not allowed when operable openings are open. That just leaving the evaporative cooling as is in the number 4 is okay.
Okay. Thanks for that input for the committee to suggest, but we're still looking for a motion.
I will move to approve as submitted.
Okay, we have a motion to approve as submitted. Chuck, go ahead.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, we have a second. All right, that being said, I'll call a vote. All those in favor of approving this proposal as submitted and written, please raise your hand. And Mike, I will take you out of, boy, everything's moving. Mike, don't vote because you're not a committee member, but I can't move you fast enough out of the panelists there.
There is a lag too when you move someone in and out, so you lose about 30 seconds.
Okay, I'll start counting. We have, actually, I just found that it does sum it up at the top there. We have 23. Okay, lower your hands. Okay, all hands are down. All those opposed, please raise your hand. Okay, 0, and all those abstained, please raise your hand. We have 1. Okay, please lower your hand. This does pass as submitted on that. So thank you all for that. We've now gotten through 2. What I'll do is I wanted to get through at least 2 of those before we took a break. I know it's a little bit longer, so I'll go ahead and set a timer here for 10 minutes. Let's go ahead and take a break. Feel free to do what you need to do. Feel free to turn off your camera if you want, but when the clock comes back to 0, we will start back up on the next one. Okay, for those of you that can hear my voice, we got about a minute and a half left, so let's start coming back, start turning your cameras back on, and hopefully we can get underway here shortly. Who's going to provide the confetti when it reaches 0? All right, let's start getting back here. We got 10 seconds left. Go ahead and start turning your cameras on. Hopefully you're back from hitting the restroom or getting a drink or checking emails and phone calls. Time's up here, so I want to keep things moving. So while we wait for the rest of the committee to get back, I do want to again thank you all for being participants in this, both the public and the committee members. You can see there's already been really good discussion, and this is why this happened. So again, thank you all for the conversations and being involved in what you do here and being subject matter experts. So it's really important. All right, the next item of business is item number 3. I am going to move that over. John, this is a proposal from you. If you want to go ahead and unmute and give us a rundown of your proposal.
Yes, thanks, Kevin. So this one is it's a modification to an existing IECC 2021 edition for fault detection diagnostic systems. So these are automated systems that work with the system and building sensors to detect common faults in HVAC devices, such as sensor failure, dampers stuck open or closed, etc. These are pretty standard practice now. And the IECC language has a requirement for new buildings with serving a gross condition floor area of at least 100,000 square feet. And my suggested modification is to lower that to 20,000 square feet. The reason is that, especially for buildings that are a lot of building types, small retail, schools, etc., offices, they often have packaged rooftop units. And the smaller buildings, from my own experience, have fewer resources available to help maintain the systems. So if there is a fault, it's more likely to go undetected for some period of time. So this really, it keeps the requirements in place, but it just extends the requirements to a broader range of buildings. And then, so it's lowering that requirement. And then the second one, Kevin, if you could scroll to the next section. I think it's 4.3.5.5. Yeah, so for the economizer fault detection and diagnostics, the modification here is just to classify the requirement in terms of systems with a minimum cooling capacity requirement. So these often have onboard diagnostics available as a system option for these system capacities. So we're looking at essentially a 3-ton and larger rooftop unit. And then I've also added language to include requirement for smaller air handling units as well to detect these faults. So these mirror some requirements in other jurisdictions, namely California, but also they're recommended because of the availability of these controls and the fact that they work. There is a study by Lawrence Berkeley National Lab that showed energy savings far outweighing the cost of these systems. The cost actually, the energy saving obviously will vary, like many things building to building. And it will also detect faults that might not even necessarily decrease energy use, such as for example, an economizer damper that's stuck closed or in a minimum position when it should be open, that could have ramifications on ventilation. Yeah, so that's the requirement for this in a nutshell. It's an extension of the fault detection and diagnostic requirements for these for these types of buildings. And then the 20,000 square feet, there's not a lot of science based on that particular threshold, except that it's designed to capture a lot of small standalone buildings that may have a need for diagnostics to offset the infrequent maintenance that often occurs. What else? I think that's probably a high level summary. It might so the code language changes are pretty in terms of the actual code modifications are fairly minimal on this one compared to the new section that we were looking at with mandatory minimums. We're mainly looking to change the thresholds for these systems. And I guess with that, I'll take any questions or comments.
Okay, let's hold off on that, John. We'll have the committee speak after the general public. So I'll ask the general public, anybody that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. General public, anybody that wants to speak in support of this proposal, please raise your hand. Looks like Mark, I'm going to promote you to the committee here. So momentarily, Mark, you'll be able to speak. But while that happens, anybody else from the general public, I see another one. Please raise your hand and you could speak. Mark, go ahead. You got 2 minutes.
Hello, Mark Zielinski, mechanical engineer practicing in the Denver area. I support this proposal with modifications. I support entirely the modifications to section C 403.2.3. However, section C 403.5.5 in the proposal is not using the 2021 IECC language. The base 2021 IECC already gives reference to all the tables, the entire section of 403. And therefore you don't need to expand the list of tables there. Further, there's it includes a trigger of 33 MVH for this. Well, there's a proposal to be heard later that will include the trigger of 33 MVH for economizers. This is where that trigger belongs. Section 403.5 already defines where economizers are required. And again, so that's where the requirement to lower the trigger for economizers belongs, is in 403.5, which is indeed proposed. And I would recommend that that you hold off on modifying that trigger until you get there. Bottom line, that would mean my recommendation is to incorporate the 403.2.3 modifications, but delete the 403.5.5 proposal. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Kai, it looks like you wanted to speak in support of this. Go ahead, you have the opportunity to turn on your camera and microphone.
Yes, I think I got it right this time. Speaking from just trying to understand it and make sure it applies to and how to apply it to buildings that I'm working on, speaking from a building person's standpoint. The 20,000 square feet, maybe just throwing that out there as a question, would it make more sense to target it at 25,000 square feet? Because that's also the cutoff for other things like the Energized Denver and other reporting and other requirements have that same kind of threshold, just so that this is in line with those. And then for major renovations where maybe you aren't replacing an entire system, would you need to have an exception or a clarification on the square footage of the entire building versus the area being serviced by new equipment?
Okay, Kai, thank you. Can you tell us who you're representing?
I work for National Western Stock Show, and we actually have a building that'll probably fall under these codes.
Thank you. I forgot to mention that. It's always nice to know
Yeah.
where everybody's coming from on that. So thank you. Okay, anybody else from the general public that wants to speak, please raise your hand. In support, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Last and final call for the general public in opposition that wants to speak, please raise your hand. Okay, now back to the committee. Committee members, is now your opportunity to ask the proponent questions, have conversations, all that good stuff. Start with raising your hands, and it looks like Eric, your hand's raised first. Go ahead.
Thank you, Kevin. Eric Browning, CPD, City of Denver. In section C403.2.3, item number 2, the word performance is struck out, and that sentence does not read correctly. I'm curious if the intent is to say something like sample each HVAC system at least once every 15 minutes, since the apostrophe S no longer has a home. So it's probably grammatical, but we would need to clean that up. And I just want to make sure that's the intent.
Yes, I think that is the intent here, because I think the rest of the sections cover the scope of what needs to be checked as a set of things.
Great, thank you, John. And my only other comment is in support of Mark's proposal regarding the amendments to C403.5.5. I will intend to make an amendment at the appropriate time, essentially to leave that section unamended. That's all for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Looks like Chuck lowered his hand. He probably covered that then. So I'll ask the committee, anybody else want to have conversation on this before we go back to the general public? Questions, comments, concerns? Committee members, now's your time to speak. Elizabeth, go ahead.
I just have a question. When we say sample each HVAC system, do we need to be explicit about what you're sampling? And I guess even before it's amended, we're sampling the performance, what exactly gets sampled in there? And maybe this is obvious to other people.
John, do you want to comment on that, or anybody from the committee?
Yeah, so I think that if it's not specified clearly enough, we can elaborate on the details of what would be tested. It's basically to get information on the system sensors, the outside air damper positions, the economizer status, to make sure that, and also to check that there's no system faults. So these things can be sampled or reported, and then reported to a central interface.
Yeah, and I'm trying to flip back and forth between the 2018 and 2021 IECCs. They're in different section, but I know the 2018 IECC had specifics about what the fault detection system was intended to monitor. And maybe that's in here somewhere in a different section. I just wanted to make sure that wasn't lost.
Fair enough. We can make sure that that's included at some point here if we need to. But if that's all you had, Elizabeth, we'll move on. Chuck, your hand is up next.
Yeah, I was just gonna agree with Elizabeth. This is a new section in the 2021, and I agree that fault detection is important, but just even the base code is so broad that it's going to be very difficult for designers, because I mean the granularity that you can possibly have sensors and fault detection, you can go very minute through testing vibrations, etc. And this is very broad, where section C403.5.5 for economizers is very specific and lays it out for the designer. So I just think in general, this section is going to be tough to apply for the public and as a member of the city of Denver. So that's my comment on that. And I'll second all Eric and Mark's recommendations to remove the amendments to the section C403.5.5, because I think it'll be covered in future proposal of C403.5.
In the 2018 IECC, if we want to just reference any language there, it's C403.5.4 is where the fault detection requirements used to be iterated.
Thank you. Looks like Eric, you're next with your hand.
Thank you again. So Chuck, just to maybe elaborate on the discussion of C403.2.3 in some more detail, is it your opinion that this language is, as I would say, maybe fully baked enough to put in code and apply, or are we considering adopting something that would be very challenging from an enforceability perspective? Because I would be hesitant to approve something that we don't have an ability to enforce, or if the minor modifications that John mentioned earlier would be adequate, or if those are not sufficient.
Well, I mean, I know my team reviewed this section and felt like it was very broad and high. It's like a 10,000 square foot or 10,000 view of possibility of diagnostics and reporting, and especially like automatically prioritize recommendations for repair and identify faults. I mean, there's a whole science to this fault detection and diagnostics. So I'm looking up the code section that Elizabeth brought up for 2018, and I just wanted to verify that. But this is the base code that's been adopted nationally. So I'm sort of comfortable with it, but on the other hand, it's going to be just difficult when somebody calls and asks, what specifically are we testing? What are all the systems we need to provide diagnostics on? It's not laid out clearly.
Okay. Good conversations to be had. Any other comments, questions, or conversation from the committee? I see no hands up. Since there was quite a bit of conversation, we do have to go back to the general public for any rebuttal. So general public, anybody in support of this that wants to speak, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. Last and final call for the general public in support, please raise your hand. Okay, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. And last call for the general public to raise your hand if you want to speak in opposition of this. Okay, seeing none, we go back to the committee for a motion. Committee, you've had your time to have discussion. Does somebody want to make a motion on this? Eric, your hand's up.
Thank you, Kevin. I will propose modification of the amendment to also strike the apostrophe S from number 2 of C403.2.3, as well as delete all proposed amendments to C403.5.5. So all strike through and underline portions of that for those to essentially not considered. That's all for me.
Okay, anybody else want to have commentary on that or a second?
I will second.
Okay, Christy seconds. So I will, before I call a vote, I'm going to ask our note taker, Erica, to verify this. Actually, I'll ask the committee because sometimes we don't get everybody back after a break. So all voting members, please raise your hand that you are in attendance and ready to vote. That way we can have a count of who we have here and if we have a quorum and not. Okay, I see 21 hands, 22 hands. Okay, so we have 22 people, voting people present, so go ahead and lower your hands. So that changes things a little bit. So we now need 12 to pass. Okay, so I'll call a vote here now that we have a motion, a second. What you're voting on is to accept this proposal as written, the changes as written on the screen. You're not voting to approve this, you're just voting to approve the changes that were brought up, and those are reflected on the screen. So all those in favor, please raise your hand.
Can I have a point of order? I thought we had a suggestion to change to 25,000 square feet. Does that need to be moved?
Yes, we do need to make, someone does need to make that recommendation, and it could be right now if that's what we want to do.
Can that be a friendly amendment by Roberts
So
to Eric's proposal?
Yeah, so we could, let's go ahead and lower our hands. And for the sake of time, what we'll do is there is a proposal or a motion out there to also change this to 25,000 square feet. And
yes, I so moved to change to 25,000 square feet.
Okay, so now just need a second because we had a change to that. So someone can second.
Second.
Okay, we have a second. Okay, so back to voting. We will now vote on these changes to this proposal. Are those accepted or not? If you are in favor, please raise your hand.
All right, Kevin, sorry, a point of order on that since there was an additional change made before we call the vote. I'm just curious why we're proposing to tweak that. I don't have a problem with it. I'm just interested in, why additional 5,000 square feet.
Sure, the conversation that was brought up from the general public was that the current Denver building ordinances, all those categories are split into 25,000 square feet or greater or 25,000 square feet and less. So that was brought up by the public.
Thank you.
Okay, let's try it. Third time's a charm. Call for vote. All those in favor of these changes to the proposal, please raise your hand. Votes are still coming in. Okay, we'll count. We have 21. Okay, please lower your hands. All those opposed, just for practicality purposes. Zero. Okay, and all those abstain, raise your hand. Zero. Okay, so it passes unanimously that these changes are now part of this base proposal. So with that being said, there needs to be another motion on the floor on what to do next with this, whether we approve this as a committee to go through. The modifications have already been approved, so as is can be the modification or it can be the proposal. Motion, man, I'm getting tongue-tied.
Second.
Bill, go ahead.
Well, I was going to make the motion to approve as written and previously approved.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, there is a second. So with that, I will call a vote. All those in favor of passing this proposal as written on the screen, please raise your hand. Okay, I'll count. We have 19. Sorry, that changed just now, 20. go ahead and lower your hand. Hands are going down. Okay, all those opposed, please raise your hand. Okay, and 0. All those abstain, please raise your hand. We have 3. Okay, so this proposal passes. All right, next up, item P 12.2, Mike Fulton. I'm going to, while I pull it up, I am going to promote you to the panelist, because it takes some time, and then I'll load this next item of business here.
So I was made aware, oh, okay. Different one I thought we were going to talk about. So,
I pulled up the wrong one. We're on 12.2, sorry.
so let me, Kevin, let me just, I was made aware there's a similar proposal out there from Christine Brinker with Sweep. So what I'd like to do is get with her and discuss rolling this into hers. So if we could table this for now, I don't know if that's possible.
Sure, that's up to the committee to decide. If that's your summary of what you would like to do, we can just go ahead and ask the committee if someone wants to a motion to make a motion.
The two proposals are very similar, so.
Would you mind speaking on what the other proposal is so the committee knows if it relates to this section?
Yeah, so the concept here was if you're replacing a rooftop unit, that you would basically do what's called a dual fuel. Say you had a gas unit, you were putting in DX, you would do what's called a dual fuel, where you would do a heat pump with gas, where the heat pump would operate to say 30-degree ambient when Excel's grid is really clean. And then beyond that, you could use gas because, Excel doesn't really have the capacity yet to really go full electrification. So that was the concept. Sweep's proposal is very similar to this. We just want to make sure that their proposal talked about new buildings. The concept for this was any replacement would have to install a heat pump. It's a minimal cost. It's $100 and something a ton. So you're not talking a lot of cost. So that was the concept. And I think it'd be cleaner if the two got married up.
Okay. I'm trying to find that proposal on my list. If we know that number, that makes it easier
It's not
for us to say that.
It's not on today.
Right. Just so the committee knows that if they're making a motion on there. Okay, well, very good. We will, it looks like I got a couple of hands up, so let's get that out of the way. Eric, go ahead.
Thank you, Micah. I'm curious, would you be willing simply to withdraw your proposal and then coordinate with Sweep and then come back with a single versus tabling this?
That would be the goal. I'd rather not withdraw it now without understanding. There's some language that to me seems contradictory to what we're doing here. So I just want to make sure that we are talking, that we can combine the proposal.
Okay, Kevin, go ahead.
And thanks. Just a point of order. I was trying to read this in context, and in my review, I thought C403.3.3 was taken. This is an added section, and that was under hot gas bypass limitation, I think. So if this version of it carries forward, probably picking the next number in line that's not taken might be appropriate.
Yeah, and someone brought up to me already that reviewed this that it kind of needs to be reworded slightly. So that's the other issue that I'd like to table it for now with the consideration of withdrawing.
Okay, so with that being said, I'm going to go a little bit out of order here, and don't feel like we have to have a motion, but is there a motion from the committee to table this or withdraw, have Mike withdraw it? If not, we'll continue down the process, but I don't want to waste time asking the public to speak if there's a motion for that. Go ahead, Bill.
So moved to follow Michael's recommendation to table the motion. Table the amendment.
Is there a second?
Mark Rodriguez, second.
Okay, so there, what we'll do is we'll hear this combined with the other proposal. So Mike, and hopefully that will help speed things up here on that. So I'll call a vote from the committee to table this to be heard with the other proposal that's corresponding to it at the same time. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, votes are still coming in. Okay, I'll count now. 21, 22. Okay, please lower your hand. Okay, all those opposed, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none. All those abstain, please raise your hand. Okay, we have one. Okay, this motion will be tabled until the next hearing or the hearing that has the combined item that Mike was talking about there.
Kevin, I have a similar thing. I'm up next on the next one. And we came up with a slightly reworded proposal that I'd like to put in the queue instead of trying to explain the changes here. So I'm wondering if we can table this till next time as well.
Do you have a version? Do you have a version available that we could share with the committee?
I do. Yeah. And I can explain, what the concept is here. So it just might be a little more painful than what you want. So
sure. Well, for the sake of not tabling a bunch of items, let's go ahead and try to get through this as written that you submitted, and then committee know that there are some changes that Mike will hopefully talk you through here.
Yeah. So the proposal basically is an addition to an amendment that was adopted in the last cycle, and it fixed a few unforeseen things. So basically, one of the things it does is increases the recovery ratio, the energy recovery ratio, to a closer, more commercially available energy recovery that's out there. We do want to modify that slightly, so I can get into the text of that in a little bit. And then it allows for increased air pressure drop on the heat recovery device from 0.6 to 1.2. But if you are going to do that, then if you're above the 0.6, you would need bypass dampers so you don't get into a parasitic loss condition where you're wasting fan energy. And so the bypass dampers will allow you to get equivalent to that lower energy. And then if you could scroll down a little bit, Kevin. The other thing that this proposal does is moves the CFMs down in terms of airflow. These are still under 10-year paybacks. We've gone through a lot of analysis on this. So it's a pretty decent payback for a building owner. And when you're considering electrification is more expensive, so it makes the paybacks better. So so that's the gist of the proposal. And I can show you the amendment, or kind of go over what I'd like to do is show you a quick presentation to go over a couple concepts, so then I can show you the amendment or our suggested. And I think I can do it under 5 minutes.
Mike, I would have to not allow that just because it's too much time. I think it's important. If you can summarize that, that's great, but I'm hesitant to allow you that much time for a presentation.
Okay. It's 4 slides. So it says I can't, there's one slide that's fairly important that if I could share, it says I can't share.
Yeah, so what we're discussing is the proposal as written. Unfortunately, since that's not part of the written proposal, the committee member hasn't had time to review your slides and things like that. We can't allow that. Sorry about that.
Okay, that's fair.
So if you're done with your summary,
yeah, just the one summary is that energy recovery is the most efficient way to get to carbon neutral. When you turn it into EER, you can get here in the couple hundred EER ratio, energy equivalent ratio. So it's by reducing these values, you're really saving a lot of energy. So.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Okay, with that summary done, we'll turn it over to the general public. If there's anybody that wants to speak in support of this proposal, please raise your hand from the general public. We do have somebody there. Mark, I'm going to promote you over to the committee here. While that's happening, anybody else from the general public that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. And Mark, when you're available, you are able to speak now.
All right, thank you. Mark Zielinski, consulting mechanical engineer practicing in Denver, and also as further disclosure, I am currently sitting on the mechanical fuel gas and the mechanical plumbing section. I've also served on these committees for the past several code sections. I noticed that this is referencing the base code rather than the current amendments. So we do need to confirm what happens to the similar but differently numbered amendment that's already in the Denver amendments. I recommend striking the sentence, energy recovery devices pressure drops above 0.6 must include bypass dam. Actually, I take that back. I come up with a different one. The intent here is to limit the pressure drop across the heat recovery section of an air handler to 0.6. But really the classic way of designing a bypass damper is to more or less match the pressure drop of the heat recovery device, particularly in some of the cheaper heat recovery systems where you can only put a little bypass damper in the corner of the air tunnel where the otherwise circular wheel is not. So it's possible to meet this section with a 1-inch pressure drop wheel and a 1-inch pressure drop bypass damper. I'd suggest the sentence be modified to limit the total pressure drop of the assembly with a bypass damper to 0.6. I also recommend not addressing the lab exhaust in this section as it conflicts with IMC 514. Exhaust systems may be in a building that are labeled lab, but they don't necessarily have hazardous exhaust system. So by striking, I'd recommend just striking that, go with 514 and let non-hazardous exhaust systems follow this requirement.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Anybody else, last and final call from the general public that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, I will ask the general public, anybody in opposition to this that wants to speak, please raise your hand. General public, anybody that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Last call for general public to speak in opposition. Raise your hand. Okay, seeing no more committee, it's now up to you to have discussion and conversation. Please raise your hand if you want to have any conversation. Linda, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. My question for the committee is regarding the enthalpy recovery ratio of not less than 60% at design conditions. A heat wheel is mentioned further on. My question is what technologies are precluded by that change from 50 to 60 if that's new to the Denver code?
Very well. Anybody want to speak to that? Mike, feel free to speak to that too if you're familiar with that technology.
Yeah, so that would allow heat wheels, which are probably 85 to 90% of the industry. It would allow plate heat exchangers, which is a smaller portion of the industry, and then it would put a burden on heat pipes or runaround coils. But that was where usually heat pipes and runaround coils are used in labs. And so that's where the suggested exception is. And I'd like to modify the exception just because I think we came up with a much better modification.
Anybody else from the committee wants to dive in onto that question from Linda? Okay, seeing none. Linda, if that's all you had, we'll move on. It looks like it. Chuck, you're up next.
Yes, thanks, Kevin. Mike, the requirement for a maximum pressure drop of 0.6 across there, is that are the energy recovery units readily available that have that are capable of a 0.6 pressure drop at 60% at design conditions? And because we've heard with our current amendment that even at 50% or at 50% at design conditions at 0.6, that those are custom units, with long lead times, which leads to problems when designing.
Yeah, so they are available, Chuck. I will say that, I have heard from Keith, that there are problems there, and that's why the amendment or the change to 1.2 is suggested, but with the addition of bypass dampers, because the concept of bypass dampers, and to Mark's point earlier, you could have a really poor bypass damper, so limiting to 0.6 in bypass is a good idea, but the concept is it designed like on a -5 degree day, if you had 1.2, you're saving a lot of energy, but in the bulk of the hours, so 45, 35 degrees, you'd be allowing bypass past the wheel or plate heat exchanger to get your fan energy down. And then obviously an economizer, that would be the concept.
Okay, and then you specify the allowable pressure drops and the fan efficiency. And I was just, section C403.8 in the IECC already addresses the pressure drop, and there's a new amendment proposal for allowable fan power and efficiencies. And I'm curious why we need to specify it for within this section, because the model code does not. It just limits the 50% at design conditions.
Yeah, so I'm not familiar. Is there a new fan efficiency? Because I haven't seen that change. I read that code, and I think it's the same as it's been for like 10 years. And the problem that we see is that basically it gives you a TSP to work with. So if you have real low pressure drops on your exhaust, you can have really inefficient fans and meet the BHP per 1,000 CFM. So what this does is kind of the BHP per 1,000 CFM was based on about 5.5 inches static. And so it kind of takes you back and says, all right, you know, the goal there was about 65% efficient fans. You know, you can't do a 30% efficient fan, which is where you can do right now. So if you had like a 1/10 of an inch external, you could do 35% efficient fan and meet code, which I don't think is anybody's goal.
Oh, thanks. And then, so this code, so the model code, ASHRAE and IECC base it on the supply air, not the exhaust. And so these tables now have added an exhaust row to the table. How does the exhaust, because the section's been modified if the supply or the exhaust exceed these values. So how do we know which column of the table to use depending on the size of the exhaust fan?
So it would either trigger the requirement. So if you had, the concept is, let's look at the first table, 80%. So if you had 4,000 CFM of air coming in, that would require energy recovery as long as you were at the, as long as you had 3,000 CFM of exhaust going out. Or so, if you had these are the floors. So in other words, you know, if you're above these values combined, you would need to do energy recovery. So I think that was the problem in the last round. The language wasn't written very well, to be clear on that.
I mean, I still think it's kind of, because the way it's written, it says either or. So if the building is supplied with 15% outside air, but they have an exhaust of, you know, 10,000 for the restroom, is energy recovery required? Because you've now.
Sorry, go ahead. Uh-oh. Like you froze.
So I'll just repeat the question, Mike. If there's you have 15% outside air and you have a 10,000 CFM exhaust, are you required to have energy recovery?
Yeah. So the concept is if you need to do well, so if you're 15% outside air, you would be down in that NR section down at the bottom. Right. Unless you were 24/7 in table 2.
Okay, so to answer that question, it would be no, you wouldn't need that. You would be
correct.
You'd still not need it. Okay, thank you. Chuck, it looks like you're frozen, so we'll move on until you get unfrozen. Elizabeth, go ahead. You had your hands up next.
Yeah, hey everybody. Mike, I just have a question for you as to a recent project where this came up on a healthcare project where this was like an inpatient type of thing where they would trigger the energy recovery requirement where they're perfectly happy to do a runaround loop, but they would absolutely not want to do a recovery wheel. Could we extend the lab applications with sort of that healthcare / COVID concerns in mind, if you're following my journey there?
Yeah, no, I think that's fine.
So we could, even if it was like lab and healthcare kind of thing,
yeah.
Just because that's certainly a bigger concern than when we wrote this first amendment.
Yeah, and I had two. Unfortunately, this I thought this was going to be later, and so I have a different language here that I would propose if I were able to start this over. But I recognize
Gotcha.
Okay. All right, was that it, Elizabeth? Okay. Chuck, looks like your hand's still up. I don't know if you've got audio again. If you still have any questions or comments, go ahead.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
All right, sorry, I apologize. My concern is also that exception number 8, because it's deleting the exception that we currently have that allows for the exemption of energy recovery if there's not an exhaust. We currently have an exception that says where the exhausted air at a single location at the building is exterior is less than the modified table C4, the tables based on an appropriate outside air column. So basically, if there's not an exhaust that exceeds the values in the table, but the supply air is greater, there's an exception. And this is similar to exceptions that are in the IECC currently and in ASHRAE. But this is, the current exception we have is more aggressive because it's based on the tables. And so I'm just concerned about getting rid of this exception because there's definitely going to be buildings where they're going to have to create a larger exhaust point, because there's like apartment buildings. A lot of times there's many small exhausts that exhaust the large volume provided by the corridor ventilation or some of the common space ventilation, but the restroom exhausts are small throughout the building that depressurize the building. So I'm just concerned about removing exception 8. I'm curious why, Mike, you wanted to remove that exception.
So the revised proposal, we would actually change that from 75% to 60%. So it just moves that down from 75% to 60%. And then it basically, we do a ratio. We would suggest changing that 60% to be a straight ratio where the 60% energy recovery ratio, where we're looking at supply CFM and exhaust CFM. And as the exhaust divided by the supply times that ratio, because it actually works out that the wheels are a straight line. And if I could share my screen, I could show you, we have a bunch of wheel ratings, but it kind of solves all of the problems with the current code with the proposals. So.
Okay, Chuck, did you have any other concerns, questions that the committee wants to hear, that you would like to have heard by the committee?
I think I'm good for now.
Okay. Yeah, committee, I'll ask another time, a third time. Is there any other conversation that you all want to have with this this proposal? Okay, seeing none. Since there was quite a bit of conversation, we do have to go back to the general public. Anybody from the general public that wants to have a rebuttal in support of this proposal, please raise your hand. Looks like Mark, I will promote you to panelist here. As soon as that happens, you can talk. You'll have 1 minute. Anybody else from the general public that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. Okay, third and final call. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. Okay, Mark, you're on.
Hi there, Mark Zielinski, consulting mechanical engineer. First of all, I highly recommend that you do indeed table this and work with Mike to get it tweaked. I've seen how the sausage works in these things, and you cannot tweak this appropriately on the fly during a committee meeting. So highly recommend doing that. You really, because you should consider lab and, well, again, the hazardous exhaust parts of labs, the thing that you're really concerned about in a lab, is already covered in section 514. What you're really interested in is the non-hazardous areas of lab and healthcare, which otherwise isn't really addressed in the code. And you'll have to address what you mean by healthcare. There's a whole lot of healthcare out there that, you know, what you're talking, first of all, I do a lot of healthcare, and it's a specific owner who has a problem with potential bypass. You really need to table this and start over.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Last call for anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this. Please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, we'll go to opposition from the general public. Anybody that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, committee, it is now up to you to decide what to do moving forward. There needs to be a motion from the committee member to what we should do next.
Sounds like we can move to table.
I'll second
There's
that.
a motion to table. There's a second for that.
Third that.
Okay, and a third. Okay.
Point of order.
Yes, go ahead.
Do we need to have a date associated? We established that
Yes,
already.
No, there
Date to table.
definitely needs to be a date because we can't just leave it open-ended. So very good, Mark. I guess we can ask Mike, or I guess I don't know. Let me ask Erica, the note taker here, if there's or the city. Is there a date that you all would like to have in mind for us to re-discuss this?
Just for a little clarity, the next code hearing was intended to focus on residential application. If that doesn't matter, I'll leave it to Eric to decide if we should push it just to the next code hearing in that case.
Yeah, I support that.
Okay, so if it's okay, the reason why we couldn't hear Mike's new proposal is because the public has to have so much time to review those. And being that this was out to the public for vote and commentary and for them to be a part of, that's why we couldn't hear the modified proposal, Mike. So if we're tabling that, there is possible opportunity for you to make those changes, I believe, as long as they're made in time for the general public to be aware of those. So I think that's right. Someone correct me if I'm wrong on that, but we are tabling this not for the next code hearing, but for the following code hearing for IECC.
The changes are ready. So if you let me know how to get you the changes so they can be presented.
Mike, just reach out to me and we can coordinate.
Okay.
Okay, very good. So there's a motion to table this and a second. I will call a vote to table this and to not the next meeting, but the following meeting, IECC Code Hearing Committee meeting. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, votes are coming in. All right, I'll count. We have 22. Go ahead and lower your hand. And all those opposed, please raise your hand. Seeing none. Any abstentions, please raise your hand. Okay, very good. This passes for being tabled for 2 code hearings from now. Thank you so much, Mike. I am going to put you back out. If I can find you, maybe you already did.
Thank you all. I'm sorry for the pain.
That's all right. Okay. Well, we are 5 minutes till. I do not want to start another proposal here. So with that being said, I want to thank you all again. We got through, let's see, by my count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 items in 3 hours, or we had a little bit less than 3 hours because we had a little bit of an intro there. We won't go through that intro every single time, but thank you all again for your time and your commitment on this and your participation. It really does make a difference. So is there a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So maybe.
Keep it official. Okay, second?
Second.
Okay, we got a second. All right, so the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all. I will stick on the line. I welcome feedback from how we do things. I'll open it up to attendees to talk to, but you're free to go, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Everyone.
Thank you.